Marcus Wellington adjusted his expensive Rolex as he stepped out of his black Mercedes in front of Buckingham Palace. The 42-year-old businessman had made his fortune in real estate across 3 countries, and today he wanted everyone to know it. His designer suit cost more than most people earned in a month, and his attitude matched his bank account. The summer heat made London feel sticky, but Marcus refused to remove his jacket. Image was everything in his world. He pulled out his phone and started recording himself, speaking loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear. "Another day, another palace visit," he announced to his phone camera. "When you're successful like me, you can afford to see the world's finest attractions whenever you want." Other visitors gave him strange looks, but Marcus didn't care. He thrived on attention, whether positive or negative. His social media followers expected this kind of content from him. The wealthy businessman showing off his lifestyle was his brand. As he walked toward the famous gates, Marcus noticed the crowd gathered around the iconic red-uniformed guards. These soldiers stood perfectly still, their tall black hats making them look like toy figures. Marcus had read online that these guards were real military personnel, trained to remain motionless despite any distractions. Perfect, Marcus thought to himself. Time for some entertainment. He pushed through the crowd of families and tourists, many of whom were taking respectful photos from a distance. Children whispered excitedly about the guards, while parents explained the tradition and history behind the ceremony. The atmosphere was one of quiet reverence and cultural appreciation. Marcus had different plans. He approached the nearest guard, a young man who couldn't have been older than 25. The soldier's face remained expressionless, staring straight ahead as his training demanded. His rifle was held at the perfect angle, his posture flawless despite the heat and the growing crowd. "Hey there, statue boy," Marcus called out loudly, his American accent cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Several tourists turned to look, some frowning at his disrespectful tone. The guard didn't react. His eyes remained fixed on the distance, his breathing steady and controlled. This only encouraged Marcus, who saw the lack of response as a challenge rather than professionalism. Marcus pulled out his phone again and started recording. "Look at this guy, folks. Completely lifeless. I bet I could make him move." He waved his hand in front of the guard's face. "Hello, anyone home in there?" The crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Parents pulled their children closer, and several people started walking away from the scene. A few tourists tried to quietly ask Marcus to stop, but he ignored them completely. "Sir, please show some respect," an elderly British gentleman said politely. "These are working soldiers serving their country." Marcus turned on the man with a sneer. "Mind your own business, old-timer. I'm just having some fun. It's not like he's going to do anything about it." The businessman turned back to the guard and stepped closer. He began making faces and gestures, trying increasingly desperate methods to get a reaction. The soldier remained perfectly still, though those watching closely might have noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes. Marcus's behavior grew worse by the minute. He started talking loudly about how pathetic it was to stand around all day like a decoration. He criticized the uniform, made jokes about British culture, and generally created a scene that embarrassed everyone around him. The crowd had thinned considerably by now. Most decent people didn't want to be associated with Marcus's display, even by proximity, but a few remained, some recording on their phones, others simply too shocked to move. Then Marcus crossed a line that would change everything. Growing frustrated by the guard's complete lack of response, Marcus decided to escalate his behavior in the most disgusting way possible. Without warning, he gathered saliva in his mouth and spat directly at the young soldier's face. The spit hit the guard's cheek and began to slowly drip down toward his collar. The crowd gasped in horror. Several people immediately started recording, while others began shouting at Marcus in disgust. But the guard still didn't move. Not even a twitch. Marcus laughed triumphantly. "See, I told you he wouldn't do anything. These guys are completely useless. What's the point of having guards who won't even defend themselves?" What Marcus didn't know was that every moment of his behavior had been captured by multiple security cameras positioned around the palace grounds. Palace security had already been alerted to the disturbance, and several officials were making urgent phone calls. The young guard, whose name was James Morrison, had been serving for 3 years. He had trained for situations exactly like this. The spit slowly rolled down his face, but he remained at attention. His training had prepared him for insults, for people trying to distract him, even for physical provocations. But inside his mind, James was fighting a battle. Every instinct told him to react, to defend his honor and his uniform. The warm spit on his face felt like liquid humiliation. He thought about his grandfather, who had served in the same regiment 50 years ago. He thought about his fellow soldiers watching from nearby positions. Most of all, he thought about his duty. Marcus, meanwhile, was basking in what he thought was victory. He continued recording himself, bragging about how he had defeated the Royal Guard. He spoke loudly about British weakness and how Americans were superior. His voice carried across the courtyard, causing more people to stop and stare. "This is how you handle these stuck-up Europeans," Marcus announced to his phone. "Show them who's boss and they'll crumble every time." But as Marcus continued his victory speech, he failed to notice several important things happening around him. Plainclothes security officers had appeared in the crowd and were positioning themselves strategically. Police constables were walking purposefully in his direction from multiple angles. Most importantly, Marcus didn't see the tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit who had been watching the entire incident from a palace window. This man had just finished making a very important phone call, and his expression suggested that Marcus Wellington's day was about to take a very dramatic turn. The businessman continued his performance, completely unaware that his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would soon make international headlines and change his life forever. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had been having a quiet Tuesday morning at Scotland Yard when her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Palace security incidents always took priority, but this one seemed different. The message mentioned assault on a royal guard and requested immediate response. Sarah grabbed her jacket and headed toward her car. She had worked palace security cases before, usually dealing with overzealous tourists or peaceful protesters. But assaulting a guard was serious criminal behavior that could result in significant charges. Meanwhile, Marcus Wellington continued his performance, completely oblivious to the net closing around him. He had moved on from insulting the guard to giving his phone audience a lecture about British culture and why Americans were superior in every way. "Look at this place," Marcus said, gesturing broadly at the palace. "All this pomp and ceremony for what? A family that just sits around spending taxpayer money. In America, we earn our success." The remaining tourists watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. Some were recording the incident while others tried to quietly distance themselves from the scene. The contrast between Marcus's loud, crude behavior and the dignity of the silent guard was stark. James Morrison, the young guard, continued to stand at perfect attention despite the spit still visible on his face. His training had prepared him for this moment, but the reality was harder than any simulation. Every second felt like an hour as he fought the urge to wipe his face or respond to the insults. 3 years of military service had taught James discipline that most people couldn't imagine. He had served in difficult postings overseas, dealt with genuine threats, and trained for months to earn his position at the palace. This role wasn't ceremonial entertainment for tourists. These guards were active soldiers with real weapons and serious responsibilities. But Marcus saw none of this complexity. To him, the guard was just a prop in his personal show. "Hey, Spitface," Marcus called out, stepping even closer to James. "I'm talking to you. Don't you have any pride, any self-respect? In America, someone did this to our soldiers, there would be consequences." The irony of Marcus's statement was lost on him completely. What Marcus didn't notice was the subtle communication happening around him. The other guards had been alerted to the situation through nearly invisible signals. Palace security operated with precision that came from centuries of experience protecting the royal family. Detective Inspector Chen arrived at the palace gates and was immediately briefed by the senior security officer. The situation was unusual because it was still ongoing. Usually, by the time police arrived, incidents were over. But Marcus was continuing his performance, seemingly unaware that he had committed a serious crime. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked. "About 15 minutes, the security officer replied. "He spat on Guard Morrison approximately 8 minutes ago. Everything has been recorded by multiple cameras and civilian phones." Sarah nodded. Assault cases were often difficult to prove, but this one seemed straightforward. She could see Marcus from her position, still gesturing wildly and talking loudly to his phone camera. "Why hasn't anyone intervened yet?" she asked. "Palace protocol," the officer explained. "We don't want to create a larger incident unless absolutely necessary. But he's crossed the line into criminal behavior now." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "Maybe I should spit on him again. Really give you all a show." That was enough for Detective Inspector Chen. She approached the scene with 2 uniformed constables, but Marcus was so focused on his performance that he didn't notice them until Sarah spoke directly to him. "Excuse me, sir. I'm Detective Inspector Chen with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you." Marcus turned around, annoyed by the interruption. When he saw the police, his expression shifted slightly, but his arrogance remained intact. "What's the problem, officer? I'm just exercising my rights as a tourist. Taking some photos, having some fun. That's not illegal, is it?" Sarah studied Marcus carefully. In her experience, people who immediately claimed innocence usually weren't. "Sir, we've received reports of disturbing behavior and possible assault. Can you tell me what you've been doing here?" Marcus laughed. "Assault? Are you serious? I was just trying to get a reaction out of Tin Soldier over there. It's not like he's going to file a complaint, right? He can't even move." The detective made a note in her book. Marcus was essentially confessing to the assault while trying to justify it. This would make the case straightforward, but Sarah wanted to be thorough. "Sir, can you confirm that you spat on the guard?" "Well, yeah, but it's not like it hurt him or anything. It's just spit. Besides, what's he going to do about it? Press charges?" Marcus laughed at his own joke. What Marcus didn't understand was that assault didn't require injury. The act of spitting on someone was legally considered assault, regardless of whether it caused physical harm. It was an intentional act that caused unwanted contact, and it carried serious legal consequences. Detective Inspector Chen had heard enough. "Sir, you're under arrest for assault. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." Marcus's face changed completely. The smug confidence disappeared, replaced by shock and growing panic. "Wait, what? You can't be serious. It's just spit. This is ridiculous." But Sarah continued with the formal caution as the constables moved to either side of Marcus. The businessman's expensive clothes and confident demeanor suddenly seemed less impressive as the reality of his situation sank in. "Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand the caution?" "This is insane," Marcus protested, as one of the constables began to handcuff him. "I want to speak to the American Embassy. You can't arrest me for this. Do you know who I am?" The crowd that had been watching Marcus's performance now watched his arrest. Several tourists continued recording, and Marcus realized that his humiliation was being captured from multiple angles. "I'm a successful businessman," Marcus said desperately. "I have millions of dollars. Surely we can work something out here." Detective Inspector Chen had heard this type of response many times before. Wealthy individuals often believed that their money could solve any problem, but British law didn't work that way. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and importance, James Morrison finally allowed himself a small private smile. Justice was being served, and his dignity was being restored. The custody suite at Belgravia Police Station had processed thousands of suspects over the years, but Marcus Wellington was creating more drama than most. He sat in the interview room, his expensive suit now wrinkled, and his confident demeanor completely shattered. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen reviewed the case file one more time before beginning the formal interview. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple camera angles showed Marcus spitting on the guard, along with his subsequent boasting about the act to police officers. The case should be straightforward. Marcus had been granted his phone call and had immediately contacted his lawyer in New York. Unfortunately for him, American lawyers couldn't practice in British courts, and finding local representation on short notice was proving difficult. "This is all a misunderstanding," Marcus insisted when Sarah entered the interview room. "I'm a respected businessman. I have properties in London worth millions of pounds. Surely we can resolve this without all the drama." Sarah sat down and activated the recording equipment. This interview is being recorded. I am Detective Inspector Chen, and I'm interviewing Marcus Wellington regarding an allegation of assault. Mr. Wellington, you've been cautioned earlier. Do you understand that caution? Yes, but I still think this is ridiculous, Marcus replied. It was just spit. No one was hurt. What Marcus didn't realize was that his case had already attracted attention far beyond the local police station. The incident had been recorded by multiple tourists and uploaded to social media within minutes of his arrest. The videos were spreading rapidly across platforms with titles like "Arrogant American Spits on Royal Guard" and "Tourist Attacks British Soldier." At Buckingham Palace, Guard James Morrison had been relieved of his post and was being debriefed by his commanding officer, Major William Hartford. The major had served for 20 years and had seen various incidents, but this one was particularly disturbing. "How are you feeling, Morrison?" the major asked. "I'm fine, sir," James replied, maintaining military bearing despite what he had endured. "I followed protocol throughout the incident." "You did excellently," Major Hartford confirmed. "Your restraint and professionalism were exemplary. However, I want you to know that the regiment takes this assault very seriously. This wasn't just an attack on you personally, but on the uniform and everything it represents." James nodded. He had been thinking the same thing during those horrible minutes when the spit was running down his face. The disrespect wasn't just toward him as an individual, but toward his service, his regiment, and his country. "What happens now, sir?" James asked. "The police are handling the criminal case, but we're considering additional actions. The palace has been informed at the highest levels. This type of behavior toward our personnel is unacceptable." Back at the police station, Marcus was beginning to realize the seriousness of his situation. His temporary lawyer, hastily arranged through a London firm, had arrived and was not delivering the reassurance Marcus expected. "Mr. Wellington," the lawyer explained, "assault in the UK is a serious charge. The fact that you spat on someone makes this clear-cut. The prosecution will likely push for the maximum penalty to make an example." "But it's just spit," Marcus repeated, as if saying it enough times would change the legal reality. "I'm afraid that's not how the law works," the lawyer replied patiently. "Spitting on someone is considered assault by battery. The fact that the victim was a serving soldier on duty makes it even more serious. You could face up to 6 months in prison and a substantial fine." For the first time since his arrest, Marcus looked genuinely frightened. Prison had never been part of his life plan. He was used to buying his way out of problems, but this situation was different. Meanwhile, the story was exploding online. The original videos had been shared thousands of times, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. The contrast between Marcus's arrogant behavior and the guard's dignified restraint was striking to viewers around the world. British tabloids were particularly harsh. Headlines like "Vile Yank attacks our hero" and "Millionaire bully spits on soldier" dominated the front pages. The story tapped into deeper feelings about respect, duty, and national pride. American media coverage was more mixed. Some outlets focused on Marcus's wealthy background and questioned whether money had made him feel above the law. Others examined the cultural differences between American individualism and British tradition. Social media was even less forgiving. Marcus's business ventures were being investigated by internet users, and negative reviews were flooding his company's websites. His social media accounts, which he had used to broadcast his wealth and success, were now filled with angry comments from around the world. Back in the interview room, Detective Inspector Chen was methodically building her case. Marcus's admissions during his arrest had made prosecution straightforward, but she wanted to understand his mindset. "Mr. Wellington, can you explain why you thought it was acceptable to spit on a serving soldier?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't think it was a big deal. He's just standing there like a statue. I thought it might be funny for my followers." "Your followers?" "On social media. I have a lifestyle brand. People expect me to do entertaining things." Sarah made a note. The premeditated nature of the act for social media content would not help Marcus's case. It showed calculation rather than momentary poor judgment. "Did you consider how your actions might affect the guard personally?" Marcus paused. For the first time, he seemed to actually think about James as a person rather than a prop. I guess I didn't think about that." The interview continued for another hour, with Marcus's lawyer trying to minimize his client's actions, while Detective Inspector Chen methodically documented every detail. By the end, It was clear that Marcus had committed assault, and that he had done so deliberately for his own entertainment. As Marcus was returned to his cell to await bail proceedings, he finally began to understand that his actions had consequences that his wealth couldn't simply erase. The comfortable world he had built around his success was crumbling, and he was powerless to stop it. The story was far from over, and the next day would bring developments that no one could have predicted. The next morning brought news that no one expected, least of all Marcus Wellington. As he sat in his cell awaiting the bail hearing, completely unaware of the storm brewing outside, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen received a phone call that would change everything. D.I. Chen, "This is Commander Roberts from SO-14, the voice said, referring to the Elite Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit. "We need to discuss the Wellington case immediately." Sarah was surprised. SO-14 typically handled direct threats to the royal family, not assault cases against guards. "Sir, what's the connection?" "There's information that wasn't in your initial briefing. Can you meet me at the palace in an hour?" Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, an extraordinary meeting was taking place. Major William Hartford sat across from Colonel Patricia Blackwood, the commanding officer of the entire Household Division. Between them lay a thick file that had been prepared overnight by palace researchers. "Major, what I'm about to tell you is highly sensitive," Colonel Blackwood began. "The American who assaulted Guard Morrison is not just any tourist. Marcus Wellington is connected to something much larger." Major Hartford frowned. "Connected how, ma'am?" "Our intelligence services ran background checks overnight. Wellington's business dealings include several properties that have been flagged by international authorities. There's evidence suggesting money laundering, tax evasion, and connections to organized crime figures." The major's expression grew serious. What had seemed like a simple assault case was becoming something much more complex. "Furthermore," the colonel continued, "Wellington's presence in London wasn't random. He's been meeting with individuals who are under surveillance by MI5. The assault on our guard may have been a diversion, or simply the arrogant behavior of a man who thought he was untouchable." Back at the police station, Marcus was completely unaware of these developments. He spent the night in his cell alternating between anger and worry. His expensive lawyer had warned him that assault convictions could affect his business visa status and his ability to travel internationally. When Detective Inspector Chen arrived at the palace, she was escorted to a secure briefing room where Commander Roberts waited with files spread across a large table. "D.I. Chen, what I'm about to share with you cannot leave this room without authorization from the highest levels," he began. "Marcus Wellington is a person of interest in multiple international investigations." Sarah studied the documents as Commander Roberts explained. Wellington's business empire was built on suspicious transactions, shell companies, and partnerships with individuals connected to serious crimes. His flamboyant social media presence was potentially a cover for much darker activities. The assault yesterday may have been exactly what it appeared to be, the arrogant actions of a wealthy man, Roberts continued. But it also gave us an opportunity to detain him legally, while other investigations proceed. Sarah understood the implications immediately. "You want to extend his custody. We want to investigate properly. His assault of the guard was real, but it may be the least of his crimes." While these secret meetings took place, James Morrison was dealing with his own unexpected developments. He had been contacted by his regimental welfare officer and told to report for a special meeting. When James arrived at the designated office, he was surprised to find not just his welfare officer, but also a representative from Victim Support Services and someone he didn't recognize. A well-dressed woman with an official bearing. "Guard Morrison," his welfare officer began. "This is Ms. Jennifer Walsh from the Cabinet Office. She has some important information for you." Ms. Walsh stepped forward with a warm but professional smile. "James, what happened to you yesterday was completely unacceptable. But I want you to know that your dignified response has not gone unnoticed at the very highest levels of government." James maintained his military posture, unsure where this was heading. "The Prime Minister has personally reviewed footage of the incident," Ms. Walsh continued. "Your restraint and professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances exemplify the very best of British military service." The young guard felt a mixture of pride and bewilderment. He had simply done his job, followed his training, and maintained his discipline. He never expected it to reach political levels. Furthermore, Ms. Walsh added. "There will be formal recognition of your service. The details are still being arranged, but I wanted you to know personally that your country is proud of you." Meanwhile, Marcus's situation was deteriorating rapidly. His bail hearing had been postponed while additional charges were being considered. His lawyer tried to get information about the delay, but was told only that the case was under review by multiple authorities. Marcus's business empire was already suffering. News of his arrest had reached his business partners in America, and several deals were being canceled. His social media accounts, once showcasing his wealth and success, were being flooded with negative comments and calls for boycotts of his businesses. The irony was not lost on observers. Marcus had created the viral video that was destroying his own life. By afternoon, news outlets had discovered the deeper story. Investigative journalists, working with information from anonymous sources, began reporting on Marcus's suspicious business dealings. The assault on the guard was no longer the main story. It had become the thread that unraveled a much larger scandal. Headlines shifted from American tourist attacks guard to suspected money launderer, assaulted British soldier, and international criminal. Caught after palace incident. Marcus, still in custody, remained unaware of most of these developments. When his lawyer finally managed to see him that afternoon, the news was devastating. "Marcus, we need to discuss your situation," the lawyer said gravely. "The assault charge is now the least of your problems. Multiple agencies are investigating your business activities, and there may be additional charges forthcoming." For the first time since his arrest, Marcus was speechless. His arrogant confidence completely evaporated as the reality of his situation became clear. "What kind of additional charges?" he finally managed to ask. "Money laundering, tax evasion, possibly conspiracy charges related to your business associates. The authorities have been watching you for longer than you realize." Marcus slumped in his chair. The man who had thought himself above the law was discovering that justice had a very long reach. That evening, James Morrison returned to his quarters, exhausted by the day's unexpected developments. He had joined the military to serve his country, never expecting that standing silently while a criminal spat on him would lead to national recognition. As he reflected on the past 24 hours, James realized that sometimes the most important battles are won not through action, but through restraint, dignity, and unwavering commitment to duty. The story that had begun with one man's arrogance was becoming a tale of justice, honor, and the unexpected ways that character reveals itself under pressure. 2 weeks after the incident, the story had taken turns that no one could have predicted. Marcus Wellington sat in his high-security prison cell, no longer the confident businessman who had strutted around Buckingham Palace. The orange jumpsuit was a far cry from his designer suits, and the harsh reality of his situation had finally sunk in completely. The investigation into Marcus's business dealings had uncovered a criminal network spanning 3 countries. His real estate empire was built on laundered money from drug cartels, and his social media lifestyle was funded by illegal activities. The assault on James Morrison had been the crack in the dam that brought everything flooding out. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had been promoted to lead a joint task force investigating international money laundering. The Wellington case had opened doors to much larger criminal organizations, and law enforcement agencies across Europe and America were working together to dismantle them. "It's remarkable," Sarah told her colleague as they reviewed files in their new task force headquarters. "If he hadn't been so arrogant, if he had just behaved like a normal tourist, we might never have caught him." His own ego destroyed him. The irony was perfect. Marcus had spent years building a social media persona around his wealth and power, never realizing that his flashy lifestyle was attracting attention from authorities who had been tracking suspicious money flows. Meanwhile, James Morrison's life had changed in ways he never expected. The young guard had been personally commended by the Queen herself in a private ceremony at the palace. The meeting had been brief but meaningful, with Her Majesty praising his dignity and restraint in the face of unprecedented provocation. "Your behavior reflected the very best of our military tradition," the Queen had told him. "You showed the world what true strength looks like." James had also received thousands of letters from around the world, praising his composure and professionalism. Children sent drawings of brave soldiers. Veterans shared their own stories of maintaining discipline under pressure. And people from many countries expressed their admiration for British military values. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, but James handled it with the same quiet dignity he had shown during the original incident. He gave only one interview to the BBC, where he spoke about duty, service, and the importance of representing his country with honor. "I was just doing my job," James said in the interview. "Every member of our regiment would have responded the same way. We're trained to put duty above personal comfort or pride." The contrast between James's humble response to praise and Marcus's arrogant behavior before his downfall was noted by commentators around the world. The story had become a modern parable about character, consequence, and the difference between true strength and empty posturing. Marcus's business empire had completely collapsed. Properties were being seized by authorities in multiple countries. His assets were frozen, and his former business partners were distancing themselves or cooperating with investigators to reduce their own legal troubles. His social media accounts, once showcasing luxury cars and expensive vacations, had been taken over by authorities as evidence in the criminal proceedings. The lifestyle he had worked so hard to display was revealed to be built on illegal foundations. The preliminary hearing for Marcus's case drew international media attention. He appeared in court wearing a standard prison uniform, looking pale and exhausted. The confident businessman who had humiliated a soldier was gone, replaced by a frightened man facing the possibility of decades in prison. His legal team had advised him to plead guilty to the assault charge in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence on the more serious financial crimes. But Marcus's pride, even in his desperate situation, made him reluctant to admit wrongdoing. "Mr. Wellington," the judge said sternly during the hearing, "you are charged with assault, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you plead?" Marcus's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Marcus remained silent for a long moment. The courtroom was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and members of the public who had followed the story from the beginning. Finally, Marcus spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Guilty to all charges, Your Honor." The admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Marcus Wellington, who had spent his adult life projecting an image of success and power, had publicly acknowledged that it was all built on lies and criminal activity. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, but legal experts were already predicting a significant prison term. The assault on James Morrison, while serious, carried a maximum sentence of 6 months. The financial crimes, however, could result in 20 years or more behind bars. Back at Buckingham Palace, life had returned to normal, but the incident had left a lasting impact. Security protocols had been reviewed and updated, and there was increased awareness of the challenges faced by the guards who performed their duties in public view. James Morrison had returned to his regular duties, though he was now recognized wherever he went. Tourists who had seen the viral video would point him out respectfully, and many asked for photos with the soldier, who had become an international symbol of dignity and professionalism. The regiment had also benefited from the positive attention. Recruitment inquiries had increased significantly, with many young people citing James's example as inspiration to serve their country. The incident that had begun as an attack on military honor had ultimately strengthened public appreciation for the armed forces. Colonel Patricia Blackwood reflected on these developments during a meeting with senior officers. "Sometimes," she said, "the worst behavior from others brings out the best in our people." Guard Morrison's response has reminded the world what military bearing really means. The story had also sparked broader conversations about respect, dignity, and the consequences of our actions in the social media age. Marcus's downfall served as a warning about the dangers of living only for appearances and the hollow nature of success built on criminal foundations. As the legal proceedings continued, James Morrison remained focused on his duties, serving with the same quiet professionalism that had made him a hero. He understood that his moment of fame would pass, but the values he had demonstrated would endure. The young soldier had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting back, but from standing firm in the face of adversity and letting justice take its course. His restraint had not only preserved his own honor, but had ultimately led to the exposure of a criminal enterprise that might otherwise have continued operating in the shadows. 6 months later, the story reached its final chapter in a London courthouse packed with international media. Marcus Wellington's sentencing hearing had drawn attention from around the world, as the case had become a symbol of justice prevailing over arrogance and corruption. Marcus sat in the dock, a broken man who bore little resemblance to the confident businessman who had once bragged about his wealth on social media. Prison had changed him physically and mentally. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple suit provided by his legal aid lawyer. His previous attorney had withdrawn from the case when Marcus could no longer pay the fees. The judge, Lord Justice Harrison, was known for his fairness, but also his strong stance against white-collar crime. He had reviewed all the evidence carefully and was ready to deliver a sentence that would send a clear message about the consequences of criminal behavior. "Mr. Wellington," the judge began, "you have pleaded guilty to charges that represent not only criminal activity, but a complete disregard for the values that hold civilized society together. Your assault on Guard Morrison was not just an attack on an individual, but on the institution he represents and the country he serves." Marcus stared at the floor, unable to meet the judge's gaze. "However," Lord Justice Harrison continued, "that assault was merely the tip of the iceberg. The financial crimes you committed over many years funded a lifestyle of luxury while legitimate businesses struggled, and honest taxpayers bore the burden of your theft." In the gallery, James Morrison sat quietly in his dress uniform. He had requested permission to attend the sentencing, wanting to see justice completed. Beside him sat his parents, who had traveled from their small village to support their son. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was also present, representing the investigation team that had unraveled Marcus's criminal network. The case had become the biggest success of her career, leading to arrests and convictions across 3 countries. "The court has received numerous character references for Guard Morrison," the judge continued, "all speaking to his exceptional service and the dignity with which he handled your unprovoked attack. In contrast, Mr. Wellington, the court has received no character references on your behalf. Even your former business associates have distanced themselves from you." Marcus's shoulders sagged further. The isolation was complete. His wife had filed for divorce, his children refused to speak to him, and his former friends had disappeared when his money ran out. "For the assault on Guard Morrison, I sentence you to 6 months imprisonment," Lord Justice Harrison announced. "For money laundering, I sentence you to 12 years. For tax evasion, 8 years. For conspiracy to commit fraud, 10 years. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently." The courtroom buzzed with reaction. 36.5 years in prison was longer than many had expected, even for such serious crimes. Furthermore, the judge added, "All your assets will remain frozen and will be used to compensate victims of your crimes and to pay the substantial costs of this investigation. You will likely spend the rest of your productive life in prison, Mr. Wellington." Marcus finally looked up, his face pale with shock. The reality of spending decades behind bars was overwhelming. The man who had once boasted about his success was facing a future with nothing. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, James Morrison felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but he took no pleasure in seeing another human being destroyed, even one who had treated him so badly. Outside the courthouse, James was approached by reporters, but he declined to give interviews. His commanding officer, Major Hartford, spoke briefly to the media instead. "Guard Morrison's conduct throughout this ordeal has been exemplary," the major said. "He has shown the world what British military values represent. We are proud of his service and his character." The story had sparked changes beyond the criminal justice system. Tourism authorities had implemented new guidelines for visitor behavior at royal sites, and security measures had been enhanced to better protect the guards from harassment. Educational programs had been developed to help tourists understand the serious nature of the guards' duties. The men and women in the red uniforms were not performers or photo opportunities, but active military personnel deserving of respect. James Morrison had been promoted to Lance Corporal in recognition of his exemplary conduct. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, which he embraced with the same dedication he had shown during the incident. More importantly to James, he had been selected for officer training. His calm professionalism under extreme pressure had impressed senior commanders, who recognized leadership potential in the young soldier. "This experience taught me that character is revealed in moments of crisis," James reflected during his final interview about the incident. "Anyone can be dignified when things are going well, The test comes when you're under attack, literally or figuratively. The viral videos of the original incident remained online, but they had taken on a different meaning over time. Instead of entertainment, they had become educational tools about respect, dignity, and the consequences of poor behavior. Marcus Wellington's social media accounts, once showcasing his wealth, had been preserved by authorities as evidence. They now served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of living for appearances and the hollow nature of success built on illegal activities. Prison psychologists who worked with Marcus reported that he struggled with depression and regret. The man who had once seemed confident to the point of arrogance was now consumed by shame about his actions and their consequences. In rare moments of honesty, Marcus admitted to counselors that spitting on the guard had been the stupidest thing he had ever done. Not because it led to his arrest, but because it revealed the ugliness in his character that he had spent years trying to hide behind expensive clothes and luxury cars. The international task force that had grown from the Wellington investigation continued their work, dismantling criminal networks and recovering millions in stolen assets. Detective Inspector Chen had been promoted again and now led a specialized unit focusing on high-profile financial crimes. The Wellington case taught us that criminals often reveal themselves through their arrogance, she explained to new investigators. Sometimes the smallest crack in their facade leads to the biggest discoveries. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, James Morrison was preparing for officer training at Sandhurst. His parents were incredibly proud of their son, not just for his moment of fame, but for the quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. The young man who had stood motionless while a criminal spat on him had become a symbol of British values and military honor. But James himself remained focused on the future, rather than dwelling on his moment of recognition. "I just want to continue serving," he said when asked about his plans. "That day taught me that doing your duty, even when it's difficult, is what really matters. Everything else is just noise." The final twist in the story came when Marcus Wellington, after serving 3 years of his sentence, wrote a letter to James Morrison. The letter, delivered through official channels, was brief but sincere. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am deeply ashamed of what I did to you. Your dignity in the face of my behavior showed me what a real man looks like. I hope someday I can earn back even a fraction of the honor you never lost." James read the letter once and then filed it away. Forgiveness was possible, but some lessons could only be learned through experience. Marcus Wellington's journey from arrogance to humility was complete, but it had cost him everything he once valued. The guard who had stood silent in the face of humiliation had ultimately triumphed not through revenge, but through the simple act of maintaining his integrity when it mattered most. In the end, that was the victory that counted.